Okay, just gonna give it like 2 more minutes just for any people showing up a little late. But in the meantime, I was just kind of curious as to uh, how you guys found out about these workshops. If any of you guys are like students at Max the Mud currently or at MTM, or if you're planning on going there. Just curious if
Uh,
you want to chat.
I'm a student from Chile, and I'm recently graduated in animation, digital animation. So I was like checking out about online courses, and I reached this page.
Okay, nice. I kind of did the exact same thing when I graduated from this college. I just wanted to keep that learning bug, so I immediately went into a background drawing course as well. It's a great way to kind of transition from full art college into uh, learning on your own.
Yeah, it's like a new beginning without the schedules and the classes. You got like pretty overwhelmed in what to do next. So
No, you got to kind of learn some self-discipline for that.
yep.
Still working on that. But okay, I think given this enough time, if people want to keep showing up, they won't miss too much in the beginning. So, first off, I just want to say again, thank you guys so much for showing up. This is already a lot more people than I expected, so that's good to see. Um, and let's just get right into it. This is going to be a pretty basic, I would say basic, but also very thorough introduction to the very fundamental skills you need in environment design and what makes a good environment design. But before we get to that, I just wanted to introduce myself a little bit. I am a MTM graduate from last summer. I went through their illustration and sequential arts program. So initially I started with a focus in comic books, but realized over my years there, I much more preferred painting and background design over telling a story. And so that's why I'm here teaching this class, because I'm very interested in environment design and designing for a full image rather than telling the story. So currently I'm doing freelance illustration. At the moment, I'm drawing card art for a card game called Run for Your Money. It's very cartoony styled, very fun, very up my alley. I'm also have been working on some freelance projects for student films. Most recent one was I did some color design and color key work for a SCAD student short film that is out in festivals now. It's called Banter. It's a very fun one. And other than that, in the future, I'm looking to do children's book illustration, tattooing, as well as background design for animation, either TV or film. Just to show you some of what my art would be. This is a piece I did for my business cards. It's actually, the full image is actually a lot larger than this because it is a wraparound for both sides of the card. But this was just a good example of what I value in painting. I wanted to show just some really strong lighting, vivid color work, very strong compositional design, where you can see it's very clearly meant to be looking right here, as well as just very loose, painterly approach to the rendering, where I'm not trying to very clearly make everything look as it should, where you can see these leaves here, they're just very fat brush strokes. Same with the birds, they're about 3 brush strokes each. I find that very engaging and interesting in painting, so just wanted to show that off as part of my business card. And then that, I also love doing illustration. This is a piece I did more recently for art challenge online. It's a art challenges I would recommend as a great way to improve your speed. Until you try and force yourself to create a full image within a certain amount of time, you won't realize how much you can kind of distill your own workflow. This one in particular only took me, I think, like 7 hours, and not 7 dedicated hours, but over 2 days. And before I had done this or participated in any art challenges, I don't think I would have been able to, or I wouldn't have believed that I could make an image this quickly. But yeah, that's a great way to improve your speed, and which is another great skill for environment design when you keep you have to get through designs very quickly and not spend too much time chewing over some details. This is another piece I did while I was at MTM. It's a portfolio piece of a camper interior. I just wanted to show a very strong sense of perspective within it. You can see, if I had the sketch with me, I would show that it's very well mapped out as far as the perspective goes. But with that, combining it with these very raggedy, loose and kind of lively line work, it makes for a nice combination that I wanted to try out and show that I could pull off within my portfolio. And just one more portfolio piece. This is a close-up I did for an animation background example. You can see it's a much more stylized and color block looking style of rendering, as well as some very direct lighting with these 3 different light sources. That was another challenge I wanted to throw in to see how I could just handle 3 light sources within a single scene. But yeah, that's just a general idea of what I value in art. I love these cartoony shapes, bright colors, interesting spaces. This is based out of a friend's bedroom I had, so thought it made a good study. But yeah, that's enough about me. I just want to give a very basic introduction to what environment design is. I'm not sure where everybody's coming from as far as their artistic journey, so I'm sorry if it ends up being too basic or over anybody's head. But in the simplest terms, environment design is the first look or the first visualization of any indoor or outdoor space within an artistic project. I think most commonly it's associated with concept art, and it is very prevalent in concept art for video games, especially. But you'll see it as a skill or a job in pretty much any field that you're going into artistically, whether you're working on a team or you're working individually. So if you're going into something like animation, you would be working with something called visual development, where you're designing the entire world, you're designing characters' homes, interiors, exteriors, prominent locations within the film or the movie. That's all skills that you would need, or those are all environment design skills that you would need for that job. Same thing with background painting for animation. That's another, being able to design that space. Other than that, comic books is another one that you really need some environment design skills for. You're going to have a lot of repeating locations, and you're going to need to be able to rotate your camera angle for each panel in those locations. So you need to have it really well mapped out and thought out. And other than that, just really any illustration you're doing, even a single book illustration, you're going to want to explore that environment and figure out what composition works best for your purpose, even if it's just a single image without a story behind it. It's a very fundamental and founding area within any project you're doing. So you're going to start out almost always with something like environment design once you have a story worked out. And because it comes so early in the process, it's going to be a very first pass at most aspects. So it's going to be a first pass at your composition. It's going to be setting the lighting, the mood. It's going to be a first pass at like shape language and world building, even your props. And all of those areas will be expanded on by other artists if you're on another team or by yourself. But what you set in the environment design is kind of the guidebook for everyone else to work off of. So say you're working at a video game company doing concept art, your environment design would be handed off to the modelers or the lighting artists or the level designers, and they're going to use what you give them to make the final product. And lastly, I would say the most misconstrued part of environment design is that the skill is not just in the final product. You're not just looking to make one nice image for environment design. That is a very important part, but the main skill in environment design comes from the thought process that goes behind that and the ability to come up with many designs and work through problems and compose images. So you could be the best painter in the world. You could paint an amazing environment. But if you don't have the skill to take direction from others and incorporate those ideas through all the initial sketches, then it's not really an environment design. It's more so a painting. Yeah. See any questions so far before I get into some of the principles? You can type them out or unmute if you'd like. Okay. Just gonna keep going. Thank you for the thumbs ups. So I'd start to break down some of the principles of what makes good design. First and foremost, I would say composition is the backbone of any good image, be it an environment, anything with a background, really. You need good composition. And what that basically means is how you place the objects or elements in the frame of your image. You want to place them intentionally, so you're kind of leading the eye in an interesting way. I think most of us would know that in a composition, you don't want to just place your subject matter right in the middle of the frame because it's very, very boring, very stagnant of a way to create an illustration. So one of the most well-known rules for composition would be rule of thirds. I've drawn out a little grid here where if you don't know or if you need a refresher, if you divide an image into thirds and look at each intersection of those lines, that's naturally where the human eye wants to look within an image. I don't remember the reasoning why, but that's just how it is. So if you make a composition interesting, you can always, or to make a composition read well, it's always a good idea to kind of stick around these areas. Doesn't have to be exact, but it just always helps with your readability. I'm just going to take a look at the original painting here for a minute. This is by Edgar Payne, I believe. He was an American impressionist, really nice painter. But this painting here is just a very clear and like bold example of how to keep simple and effective composition. I don't know about you, but for me, my eye immediately goes to this big lit area of the rock. It's just, well, one, you can see it falls on rule of thirds here, but also it's just a very kind of bold, catching shape because of the light surrounded by all this shadow. And once your eye lands there, it is immediately taken down this curve all the way to this beach where you see these men with some canoes. And it's just such a really strong example. You can even see, you could shrink this down to, the size of a thumbnail and just see how easily that shape just kind of makes a big arrow right to the focal area of your composition. But yeah, that's the general idea behind it. I would say generally you have two elements in composition that you're trying to achieve. You're trying to achieve focal area and path of the eye or a path of vision. So in this one, the focal area would be these men here, and path of vision would be this sort of swoop here. You can also see this rock here in the foreground. This is also very intentionally placed to lead your eye, because when you take this path down to the focal area, it's such a strong line for your eye to follow that it could almost lead you all the way off to the page. Like you can imagine if this rock wasn't here and the beach, you just had this line of light at the beach, you would follow that and you would just kind of end up looking somewhere to the side, which is a bit awkward and it just feels wrong. So he added in this rock as well with this kind of upward angle so that when you do follow that, instead of going off the page, it kind of stops your eye and sends it back up And then you just kind of have this nice circular motion that makes the image just very visually interesting and engaging to look at. Even though it is a stationary image, it feels like it has a bit of movement and it keeps your interest longer than it would otherwise. It's another example. This one is some actual concept art from, I don't remember the artist, but CG Master Academy. This one, I love just how strong the line is. It's very obvious that your eye probably starts somewhere with this ship in the foreground. Actually, before I go, I should clarify. I've shown this image to some other people and they just didn't understand the perspective. So I should say that this is some boats or some big ocean liners just kind of, I don't know how, but somehow crashed into icebergs and sort of sunk into the water. I just thought it was a really interesting idea. I have no idea how the ships would actually get into an iceberg, but anyways, they're there. And our eye normally would go to this ship right here because it's such a strong wedge-like shape. It's almost like an arrow pointing into the image. So your eye will immediately take that, and it's also a very strong image because it has these very obvious lines because it is a man-made thing. You can't get away with that so much if you're drawing like a landscape, but with this, it's just super obvious where it wants you to look. It just points you right to this area of the image. And once you're there, you're also going to notice these other giant ships in the background. And so with that, you end up taking this kind of nice zigzag through the image to all these interesting areas to look at. And it just kind of keeps your eye bouncing back and forth, noticing different details. Just show now, this is how I have it mapped out a bit. You have these strong lines. They don't have to line up exactly, like you can see the ship. It doesn't have to, take you exactly there, but it's close enough that your eye can jump the distance. You also notice this over here, this mast of the ship. It's kind of serving the same purpose as the one in the last image, where this one cuts off the corner to keep your eye from just kind of running right off the page. This is the same way in that it's kind of leading your eye up and then you can get back in here. So if you do look to this area, it doesn't feel so blank, where otherwise, if you can imagine it without this mast, it would just be a very blank, dark area of the ice, and it might look a little off otherwise, or your eye might dwell on there a bit too long. Again, you can see focal area right here is made pretty much almost exactly on the rule of thirds. It just always works. You can't go wrong with using rule of thirds. And just a couple more subtle lines for your eye to follow. You can see in this corner, there's this cable or maybe a trail of some sort, but it's just a really simple way to lead your eye back to this focal area if you do end up kind of looking to this corner. Same with any of these shapes in the water, they're sort of pointing right back here where they want you to look. And if you'll notice, there's actually right here, there is a small person. It's just so hard to notice that, because of he kind of blends right in with the ship he's standing on. But it's good to show how this is the focal area, and you might not even notice the person and realize you're looking at that. That just shows that you're looking in this area because of all these compositional devices and not because, oh, there's a person and that's an interesting subject matter. Okay, it's hard to decide if composition or value control are the most important aspects of environment design, but I'd say right up there, they're the most two important. So value itself is just a way to describe how light or dark a given color is. So in this image here, I would say the sky's a light value, these trees are a darker value. You have all these different values in between, these mid values. That's just all I mean when I'm saying values, how light or dark it is. And value control is how you're using those images to, again, draw the eye to areas you want it to look and to draw the eye away from the areas that don't matter so much in your composition. And how you do that with value control is with contrast. So much like rule of thirds in composition, your eye naturally goes there. Your eye naturally goes to high contrast in an image, or life in general, really. For this one, I think most of us would immediately be drawn to this area when we look at it, because you're seeing a lot of very kind of intricate dark areas right up against these lights. You could even say you have the darkest areas of the image right next to the lightest areas. You might say, or the sun is a bit lighter, but because it's not surrounded directly by any of these very dark values, it doesn't stand out so much as this does. But we could change that if you ignore my poor edit. Now immediately your eye will probably go right here because you're having almost pure white next to a very dark black value. And that's just what your eye has to look at immediately. It's just kind of an unconscious reaction. You might look later and realize that there's a lion down here and a woman, but you're not going to go there immediately, even though it is a more interesting subject matter, you could say. And this is a good example of how the subject matter isn't what you're looking at, or isn't what's drawing you to that in an illustration. Even though usually the subject matter is the most interesting thing, it's not because it's interesting is why you're looking to it, if that makes sense. So I didn't add this face in, I just kind of lightened it up, because in the original one, this is the original image, it's so dark that you probably don't notice that there's these random faces in the trees, because that's not the point of the image. The artist wants you to look right here. And so even though this is a pretty, or you would think a face in a tree would be a very catching subject matter, the artist has really controlled his values so that you're not seeing any of these faces until you look closer. You can see I added a little more contrast as well to really make this whole area pop with these sharp edges. Oh yeah, so all of that is very important to know as far as an illustration goes, or a finished image. You're going to want a very strong focal point within that. And with environments, it won't be as strong or as necessary, because, quite often you're designing environments so that you can eventually place characters in there, or design, if you're doing games, you're going to design a level around that, but you're not going to be using that as box art or something like that. So quite often, like in this image, there's not a very strong focal point based in values, but it's more so meant to show what an area could be like, or an example of what you could turn a final illustration into. For our purposes and what we're going to be doing in our exercise today, we'll be using depth, or we'll be using value more so to show depth in the image, because that's another very important element to show within an environment. You want to be able to show that it's built in 3D space and it goes farther back, and it just gives it a full sense of space to your image if you can control your values using depth. The easiest way to think of it is that as things go further in space, they will get lighter in value. That's just because if you think of a mountain all the way, however many miles from you, it'll always appear like a very light blue or purple. And that's just because of how much atmosphere is in between you and the mountain. It scatters the light. I don't know the exact science, but I know it scatters the light so that it gives the mountain a very atmospheric light blue look, just like it's doing in this image. You can see there's less detail in here. The shadows kind of make one big form. And then even further back, it's just the silhouette in this light blue. And that's just a really easy way to trick the eye into thinking that there's a lot of depth in this image, even when it's a flat. These are some thumbnails by the same artist. I should mention this is from Andreas Roca. He's a concept artist, and he also does some card art for Magic the Gathering. He's really good at keeping his environments very simple and readable. So just like these thumbnails, which are for, I think, the same project as this, you can see that he's not really paying attention much to lighting even. He's just using values to block out each plane within his compositions. So you can see he's keeping his foregrounds almost purely black, which is true to life. The closer things get to a camera or to your eye, the darker they appear. And then as they go further into space, he has a little more detail in the lighting, and it's a little bit lighter. And as things go, now they're losing detail. They get even lighter, until you reach all the way to the sky plane, or I'm not sure what you would call that, just the furthest possible you can see within an image. So yeah, these are just really nice. They're not even so much value studies as they are depth studies. And that's exactly what we're going to be working on today, or I'll at least be demoing for you. So we'll come back to these thumbnails for sure. A little more on depth. You can just see that clear divisions between your foreground and your midground and your background are what can make an environment legible when it might not otherwise. For this one down here, you can see these characters, they stand out really well against this midground. Even though the shapes in here are they're very complicated. There's a lot of little lighting, edge lighting and shadows. And there's this water spraying down, it looks like. So normally these two characters would get completely lost against all of that. But because the artist has pushed the values so far back, where now there's not this dark contrast that you see between the lit side and the shadow side of this character, it's so much lighter down here that these their silhouettes still read fully. And same with this house over here. Of course, same thing in this image. You can see everything has a slight fade to it as it recedes in the distance. It can be really striking for something like this. And it's also, it can add a lot of readability even to very small details. Like if you look, you can see these little black spots in the air. I'm not sure if they're meant to be birds or maybe, I don't know, soot, because it seems like there's a lot of burning flames in this. But you can tell that they're a lot closer to the camera than this bridge, just based on how dark their value is. Because you can kind of assume that this bridge is a very dark color, but in reality, it would be a dark color. But because it's so far back, it's so light. And these must be closer because they're almost the same color, or almost the same value as these foreground elements, which are nearly black. A couple more ways to enforce depth without relying strictly on value would be just overlapping shapes. No matter what, if something is in front of the other, it must be closer in space. That's just a very simple rule. So even though these seem like these houses over here have similar values, you can tell that, you know, this one here is in front of this one here, and this one is in front of the background, just because they're overlapping. You could design this just in line, but if they were still overlapping, you would understand which one is closer. Another simple one would be scale. You can really clearly and quickly understand the size or the depth of an image based on how things are scaled within it, especially if you have repeating objects within the environment. So for this one, you can see in these houses, you have all these big, tall spires, all these domes, and you can see the further back just how small they get, where you compare this one to the rest of this house, it looks, you know, it's so completely small, even though it's a similar form, it really implies just how far back it must be within space. Same thing with this house here. You can look at even the size of like the windows, just how small they are compared to these ones in the background where you can barely see the windows. Your mind assumes that these windows are the same size in reality, but it understands that, oh, these must be pushed so far back in the distance because in my head they read so disparate in their size. Okay. After that, I want to get a bit into shape design. This is another one that you might have a little bit of experience with, or you might know a bit about. Basic idea behind it is that certain shapes have connotations or kind of predetermined feelings that they evoke in us. The most basic examples would be things like round shapes, blocky shapes, and pointy shapes. I think most people would agree that round or circular shapes have a friendlier or a simple or a kind feeling to them. Blocky shapes, they generally feel very like structured, very sometimes quite boring, intimidating even, very ordered. And sharp shapes, they're an interesting mix. They can be exciting and as well as dangerous or alarming even. And one of my favorite examples to use for that is Lord of the Rings. You can see the Shire was so clearly designed with round shapes in mind. You have all these rolling hills and these sloping, curving paths. Even the slopes of their homes and the doors themselves are even circles. It's very intentional, very overt shape design. Same thing with the Eye of Sauron. It's a really nice mix of some blocky shapes combined with these little sharp shapes that come off, especially at the top. And it gives a sense of like authoritarianism and order, structure, and yet also danger and like imperialism to it, really. Just evil. Here's another couple of very overt examples of shape design. And all of that to say that you don't have to feel so limited to the three basic shapes. I think a lot of people will get caught up in that, thinking that they have to make their designs sharp or squared or rounded, when a great way to use shape design is to evoke something that's a little more complicated, but is still very familiar to us and has those connotations. This mushroom one is a great example of that, where this image below, you can see that he's clearly based these homes or trees or something off of mushrooms. And we already have a lot of predetermined ideas about what mushrooms are, how they make us feel as people. I think most of us would agree that they're weird, they're a little eerie. They can even feel alien, even though they are from Earth. But because of that, because of the way we think of them, or a lot of us will think of them, it very easily lends itself to making this world feel even more alien than it would feel. You can kind of imagine if you designed them just to look like regular trees, it wouldn't have that same odd feeling about them as they do when they look like mushrooms like this. Same thing with the kind of branching structure to them. It's very organic and it's very just kind of odd. It's a little off-putting, which is what I think they were intending. As well as this Fortress of Solitude concept art. And I can't remember the artist for this one, I'd have to look it up. But it's very obviously based off of ice crystals, with these really opposed and kind of clashing shapes where they're kind of cutting through each other almost. It's just a very harsh design language, especially with how it's asymmetrical and just very off kilter. I also say it feels very cold, which sounds stupid because obviously it's made of ice, it would be cold. But you can imagine something with this form. You can imagine it's like something made of stone, a similar building in this sort of shape, or if it was like a modern art looking building where it's made of steel beams, if it still held this icy looking structure of these crystals, it would also feel cold. Oh yes, okay. One more example for some shape design. I love these two just to show how you can make your world feel cohesive with shape design. Oh, there I got the artist credit for Gabe Kralik. These ones, you look at these mud huts and see they're very asymmetrical, they're blobby, they're kind of ramshackle, ragtag, kind of almost falling apart. Very organic shapes as well. And then if you look to the trees, you can see that they're so similar and they just immediately kind of click together as though, oh yes, of course, these both belong to the same world. Even though they're completely different objects, you know, they're not even made of the same, like the sticks here don't look like the sticks from here, from the wood here, but they still just read as the shapes and the design is similar enough that you understand these belong together. Okay. Just one last principle I wanted to touch on would be color harmony. I'm not going to get too into this because for the exercises we're doing today, we're only going to be working in gray tones. And I just want to emphasize that it is a very important skill to learn for environment design. But in order to learn good color, you have to already have really good control of your values. So I think it's not really worth getting into until you have a good grasp of how to control values. But I did just want to include a couple, just like short ideas for how you can add color to something like a grayscale thumbnail. Like an example right here, just a very quick way to add it. First off, choosing colors. You can't go wrong if you choose one of these basic palettes. These are kind of tried and true color combinations that are always pleasing to the eye. It's really hard to mess them up. So when in doubt, you can pick one of these. It doesn't have to be these exact colors, but any of these color relationships where you have, 3 colors right next to each other or 2 diametrically opposed colors on the color wheel, those will just always work. So I definitely recommend first trying color with some more established palettes like that. And as far as how to add the color to a grayscale thumbnail like this, my favorite way is by using a color blend mode. So whatever your digital software you're using, there's going to be some mode that's called color. And basically, if you turn that on, anything you add to that layer will only affect the hue of what you're drawing or what is underneath. So in this, you can just completely wash it with green and it won't affect any of your values. So nothing will get lighter, nothing will get darker. It'll just change how green or how gray it is. And that's just a great first step to use when you're transitioning from your grayscale thumbnails into color. And it's one I use personally as well. Just want to show a couple quick examples of some color harmony and using these basic palettes in some more refined pieces. These are both by Minyam. She's another concept artist with a really nice painterly style to it. For this piece right here, this is just a very bold example of complementary purple and yellow color palette, where it's basically the only 2 colors she has in this entire painting, and yet it still feels so lively and interesting because there's such opposite colors that they just really amplify each other. You could see that's the palette right there. And for this piece here, this is a nice example of how you can use a triadic palette. Sometimes these palettes can be a little more challenging because the colors are so far from each other. It can sometimes seem a bit disorganized because you're covering so much of the color wheel. But this is a great example of how to control that. You can see she used a really saturated orange as her main focus in this painting. And then to balance that out, the other 2 colors in the palette are very muted and grayed out right there. So that way it doesn't become this clashing mess of bright blue and bright green and bright orange. It just really makes this orange pop instead. Yeah, I could keep talking about color. It's my favorite aspect of art, but unfortunately, it just doesn't really fit into what we're talking about today. So, anyways, move on from the principles. Okay, after this, I'm just gonna kind of get into the exercise itself. Did you guys have any questions before I start explaining what we can work through? Just give it an awkward moment of silence. Okay. Let's get back into this. So for this, I wanted to keep the exercise useful, but still simple enough to approach that if you haven't done environments before, this should still help you understand the process and how to not only make your own environments, but how to use reference and view other people's work and understand why their images work. Oh, yes. Go ahead, Mario.
Okay. First, first thing, there's a question in the chat for you to read. Another one is like,
Oh,
I was making a background, and my main issue is like I choose a triad color, and I was like, okay, this is like a night with a moon. But what happens when I have like materials on it, like wood, concrete, yeah, things like that? What happens when it gets mixed with? I know it's not like the issue in this particular course, but if you have like a recommendation for that, like how to mix the colors or what, like I don't know how to say in English. What recommendations you have about that? How to mix materials with the ambient lights?
Okay. I guess, are you saying how would you fit things into your color palette that may not necessarily be those colors?
Yep.
Okay. I have a good way to explain that. I'll just wait till we're to the work time and I can kind of go over that a little more thoroughly. Because of course I love talking about color, so I would love to explain that.
Yeah.
So yeah, put a pin in that. If you have to, please remind me and I'll bring that back up. Okay, and then for Tina, could composition play a big part in shape language as well? It it absolutely can, especially if you're working with some larger shapes like in your environment. They can kind of go hand in hand. Like, let's try and find an example. Let's see. Trying to find a good example that mixes the shape design with that. Like for this one, this is a good, I think this one works for that. This one, it doesn't have very clear shape design like I was talking about with those very basic examples of like sharp or rounded or square. But it does still have a sense of the shape to it where it has this large looming rock, especially with how it's designed in these interesting curves. Like you can see the grain of the rock is making these really interesting swoops down or across, and then it's also making them all the way up as well. And so I think I would count that as part of shape design, where you have this really interesting, almost swirling pattern on the rock. It gives it a really sort of like grand and I don't know how I would describe it. For me, it feels like it's like an adventurous, like old spirited adventure sense to this painting. And that also lends itself to the composition, where because you have these lines all kind of leading in that direction, it also helps with the composition to lead your eye that way. I'll have to find some better examples for that, but shape design can definitely play into your composition as far as using it to create those elements and enhance the feeling that the shape design is meant to convey. Let me get back. Oh gosh, I went way too far. Okay, any last questions before I start the exercise? Okay. I'm gonna leave. Oh, just so you know, when I'm doing the presentation, I can't see the chat, so I appreciate you, Mario, calling out the chat.
You would like for me to do that? I can.
Oh, yeah, if you if you would continue
I
to, I appreciate
just
that.
don't want to be like awkward or like to. Uh,
No,
I don't talk too much
in a
English,
video call, you always need someone that will will unmute.
like the manager. Yeah, I will.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
And also, I should say while I'm at this pause, hello and thank you to everybody else that joined while I was in the middle of that last part. Um, if you want me to go over some other parts after we get to the work period, just let me know. But yeah, now I just want to start explaining what this exercise is going to be. I would call it, or the purpose of this exercise is meant to be thinking in the biggest shapes you can for when you start an environment, and as well as thinking about how that depth plays into it. So this is a nice example right here of how many environment artists will begin one of their pieces. Here. Quite often, and for myself as well, I will lay down just some really rough and kind of abstract shapes in value. This artist may or may not have had an idea for what they wanted to paint when they started, but either way, they just lay it down very, very basically. And once you have that, and once you decide, oh, I kind of, something about this is interesting to the eye, that part is hard to explain, but you'll kind of understand as you work through some of these yourself. Like this is a interesting shape to the eye where it has a bit of a flow, bit of a rhythm to it. You can start to develop that and flesh it out more into an environment versus an abstract painting. Like in this example, you can see he's already thinking about how this piece of land sits in the 3D world. You can see he's added in a horizon line here, as well as this other area of this little peninsula behind it. I'm imagining this is sort of like a sea. So he's already got very roughed out early on. He's got his foreground here, he's got a midground, and he's got a background. He just wants to, artist wants to make that very clear right away to see if the image is reading well or not. You can see he's not adding in any detail in the front. He's just keeping it to these shapes to figure out his values first. He's also considering a focal point. You can see here where he's adding in this light spot surrounded by all these dark values. That just instantly creates a place for the eye to focus. And then as you flesh it out, you can see he's now considering a path for the eye, or the path of vision, like I was talking about before in composition. Quite often it can be a literal path because that's just a very easy compositional device to use. So you can see he's added that in. It gives us a really nice flow into the image, and he's really reinforced this focal area with these values. He's really widened this up and kind of spaced out these pillars more to make it a little more, give you a little more breathing room in there. And this already would lend itself really well to an illustration with character in it, because all you do is you just put the character right here and it's already, right in the middle of focus. No effort needed. But you can also see how it reads even without any really interesting subject matter. Like this is, I can't tell if these are bushes or pillars, but your eye still is interested in this area. You can also see that he still hasn't touched anything with any sort of detail here. He's just left this as pretty much one big stroke. The sky is one sort of messy gradient, because there's no point in adding detail when you're working this early on in the project. It would just be sort of a waste of your time when you could be coming up with more thumbnails like this. So these are some more examples of how you can thumbnail in environment design. I love how this one is just so simple. They're not even using any gradients really in the beginning. They're just kind of sketching out what I need to be dark, what I need to be light. That's such an easy way to just already get such a head start on your environment. And then you can go in with, just a little bit of detail, but clearly not much at all, because it doesn't need it if it has the values reading well. You can also see that he did sketch this one out, which I'm going to discourage doing any sketching in this class, just because I want to really enforce that we're going to be working in big shapes. And I find most people tend to slow down quite a bit and feel very reliant on line work if they're not used to painting. When working in environment design, I think by far the fastest way to work is by laying out your values versus drawing out a scene and then laying in values to see if that works. Because you're kind of just saving yourself a step if you go straight to the values. Because you're not concerned with structure at this point. It doesn't matter if your perspective is off, as long as things are in the right areas of your composition. You can usually make perspective work to your needs versus the other way around. I included these examples. I believe there are some concepts for Skull Island or whatever the recent King Kong movie was. But these ones are really nicely rendered and detailed, almost to the point where they look like finished images that have just been turned grayscale. And these might look like very, I guess, like unapproachable or intimidating as far as imagining doing these as your thumbnails, but I just want to show you just how simple they really can be. Like, especially this one where you have all this water spraying and these vines. It seems like a very complicated image. So for this, I just broke it down. This is the same thumbnail, just enlarged. And yeah, you can see all this flowing water. You have all these rock and root forms, these vines. But if you can just look at this yourself and kind of squint at it, and you can see that most of those details don't matter at all for the composition. They look great. They make it a really nice looking thumbnail, but I would bet a lot of money that the artist started out with something that looked more like this. They figured out what the values should be. They worked that out, and then they went in with some detail just to really make the image pop. So you can see you have this line of the nose bridge that adds a lot of form to the image, but if you blur your eyes or you squint a bit at it, it doesn't matter. The image still reads even without that there. So the artist probably didn't include that for a while. Same with all of these roots here. You can see all these very intricate little shadows and highlights on them. But in this image that I very purposely blurred out, you can't see any of that. You can see a couple blobs, but most of it just blends right in with the rest of this background. So when you're doing thumbnails, you're not going to be spending time on all these little details when, in your first pass at least, none of it is going to even show up. You don't need to consider that yet. These are just some more thumbnails. I really just want to hit home how simple thumbnailing should be and how it is for most artists. Again, these artists are all considering lighting in some form, but it's just such very basic ideas for how the lighting is going to hit, where they're just directing the light in ways to create these focal areas. Like this one's a great example where I don't know what sort of lighting scheme would create this, but it just kind of makes sense that it doesn't make sense, but it makes for a very compelling image where you have this very convenient breaking of the clouds to let in this little strip of light. And you can imagine putting, a character or a castle or something right there, and it would fit perfectly, and it would be so nicely framed by all these shadows. Same with this one, where the light's just hitting a very nice area, and the clouds are letting up right here just to let this rock really shine as a focal point. And you can achieve, these very detailed and nice relationships in your composition and your values with just such basic brushstrokes. Especially in these, you can see they're just so messy looking, but they still read as a quality image, and that's what you're looking for. Okay, this is just to explain exactly what the exercise is. I've been kind of pussyfooting around that. We're just going to be breaking down some images into very basic foreground, midground, and background planes. These are the Andreas Roca thumbnails that I said we'd be coming back to. They're just such perfect examples for this exercise. But yeah, so I'm going to want, actually, let me link this folder to you guys if we're interested. I have a folder in Google Drive folder. I'm going to add into the Meet chat. I'll pin that as well. So that has some reference images that you guys could work from if you'd like to work through some of these exercises in the class. And you can also submit your art there so I can kind of take a look at it and give you some advice if you'd like. Yeah, so just check out the reference folder in there, find some images that are interesting to you. I tried to include a nice variety of concept art and animation backgrounds or viz dev pieces. I tried to get a couple comic styled images in there, but it's tricky to find good comic art when it's not, a full page of panels. I even have some fine art paintings in there if you're interested in that, if you're doing, illustration for yourself. But a lot of them have some really nice and clear depth to them. And so you're going to be looking at the paintings in the reference folder and trying to just very clearly map out what would be the foreground, the midground, and the background. And just doing that in some very basic, dark tone, medium tone, light tone. Just like these ones. These have a couple extra tones. They have maybe, 4 or 5, but you can still very clearly see, dark, medium, light. I want you to focus on some really large shapes. In this one, you can see a really nice example. You could have a lot of detail in this ground, but instead he chose to just make it 2 very basic shades just to see how the composition reads. And I'm also gonna just say stay away from any lighting or soft edges for this exercise. I understand that quite often there won't be like a harsh line between a foreground and a midground. If you have something like the environment you're working off of is just like a one wide field, there's not going to be a clear indication of what's foreground and what's background. But I just want you to just decide where you think it should be in the image, just as far as the composition goes. I'll show you an example in a moment. But yeah, we're really just focusing on understanding the depth in an image and understanding how that adds to the composition. I threw out 5 to 10 thumbnails. I don't think that's a very accurate estimate now. I first designed this thinking it would be a 3-hour class, so we might get through less of those, but generally I would spend maybe like 5 to 10 minutes per thumbnail just trying to figure these out. Show you, this is an example of what I mean. I chose this one specifically because of how packed with detail it is. It's almost like staticky with the amount of detail. It's just like white noise a bit. But you can see that it still reads really well as an image because you have these very clear delineations in the depth. So you can see there's this one massive tower as your foreground. You would just kind of illustrate that as so. Then you have a castle for the midground. And this is what I mean, where there's not a clear indication of where foreground to midground would end here because it is just one big plane. But in my example, I just chose a spot and I just said, that works as far as the composition goes. And then this I just left as one big background plane, even though there's this whole castle here that's also very interesting and eye-catching, but because it's so far back in space, I'm not going to add it as its own object. We're just kind of really focusing, really trying to hammer in. This is just about understanding the spatial awareness in this image or in any of the images you're looking at. So I guess you'll give me a moment. I'll get my Procreate up and running and show you how I would approach this. Do you guys have any questions before I start a demo?
So no gradient, right?
Right. For now, at least. If you wanted to later on, it would be really easy to just add in some gradients for it.
Okay.
But for now, we're just going to really keep it strict to single values.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry, I had to panicked thinking I was going to have one of those microphone feedback loops. Let's share my screen. Okay. I just prepared a quick example. Right here, this is how I would set up the exercise for today. Just find one of the reference images and then create a canvas about the same size, just so you can kind of get the composition the same. For mine, I have it set up as just a layer that I'm going to add a bunch of clipping layers to, so I can keep my layer or my planes in the space separate. If that makes sense, so I can easily, erase one without erasing the other. So for this one, I would just first I'll just kind of look at the image, see what I imagine the different planes to be. Let me get a little layer up here so I can illustrate what I'm talking about. For this one, obviously, this, let's figure out my layers first. This whole tree here stands out as very much in the foreground to me. Same with this whole slope here, because you can tell if this tree is sitting on the slope. Sorry, I'm going to do a lot of scribbling. If the tree here is sitting on the slope, this would also have to be included within this plane. That's kind of the rules we're going off of, where if it's on the same plane, it has to be, or if it's, on or above that plane, it has to be on that plane. This will make more sense when I actually draw these out. So because these characters are standing closer to the camera than this tree, these guys would also be in the foreground. Same with these guys. And this is where you have to really use your understand the sense of what these illustrations are going for, where if they've done their job, then the perspective will make sense and you'll be able to tell, like, okay, this plane or this tree is on the same plane as this other tree. They're equally close to the camera, I would say. So I would include part of this tree within that. I'm going to start getting into the actual drawing here, just to show you what this should look like. Let's see. Part of the exercise is I'm going to highly encourage you to use a very large brush, probably a lot larger than you're used to using. This is the size I am using. Oh, no problem, Manuela. Thank you for coming. And it's all recorded, so you can look back if you want or ask questions once we get to a work time. Anyways, yes, I'm using a very large brush for this, and that's going to really, I encourage you to do the same, because it's a good sort of limiter to keep you from trying to draw out any forms. So instead of doing any of this, I really want you to just go in very messily and just figure out these shapes and see them just as these the forms that they are, and not try and draw out any of the lines. So this is a part I really wanted to talk about. This tree here, it seems like because the values on it are so dark, I'll be a bit more clear. This tree, because the values are so dark, I think the first instinct for most people is to include this in our foreground, where I've started doing it down here. But if you just kind of look at the shape of it, you can see based on how he's drawing these lines and how it's fading a bit into the background, that the tree is actually kind of moving away from the camera. So it's kind of pointing that way before it turns upward. And then it's, not going away or towards the camera. It's just going straight up. But because it is it's moving so far back in space that I'm just going to make a really arbitrary decision as to where I'm going to count it within the foreground versus in the midground. And so that's why I'm going to end up with this kind of weird shape here, where it doesn't look like the image itself, but this isn't meant to be an imitation of the image. We're not trying to match the values here. We're more so trying to understand where things are going into the space of the image. So this part of the trunk is nearest us, but after that, it's not really part of the foreground. But these characters are, so I'm just gonna make some quick, really sloppy indications of these two characters here. These characters are in the foreground, but they're kind of totally covered by this part of the trunk. So we're just going to kind of understand that they're there. Next, I'm going to go to get another layer behind that so we can go into the midground. For that midground, of course, we would have this tree in there now because it's been moving back in space. Can add that in. Again, the forms are, totally not accurate to what the image is, and that's okay. As long as you're getting a general idea of what the forms are and how close they are to one another to kind of get the same sense of the composition. Like obviously I wouldn't draw it all the way over here where then it's kind of interfering with, whatever's going on there for the values. But just, very casually blocking out the rest of this. There's this form I would definitely count in the midground, as well as much of this ground plane and the rock here as well. And it's okay if things kind of blend together, like at this part of the tree trunk where in the image itself, it's very clear that one is behind the other. Like this ground is clearly much further behind the tree. But because we're really condensing our values, a lot of things will sort of get crunched together and they'll just kind of, it'll just have to be condensed like that. And that's fine for this exercise. We're not looking for an accurate representation of this. We'll just go in a little more. Refine some of these. I'm gonna leave these trees out of the midground just because they are so much further back. I would leave it, just kind of like general indication. And I think this is a good balance between midground and foreground. You have, a decent amount of foreground, decent amount of the midground, and a good bit of the background showing through. So this could be as far as you take one of your thumbnails or some of your thumbnails. If it's not a very complex image or not a very deep image as far as, 3D space goes, it doesn't go far back into space. this could be all you need. But for this one, I'll just show you how I would add a fourth layer to it, which many images will end up needing. So just keep it quick, add in these really loose branch structures. It's really odd sort of root shapes as well. I'm not being too precious with trying to get them, trying to draw out the right shape the first time. You can see, like, instead of trying to draw in all these little nooks and crannies here, I'm just going to kind of go over it because it's actually a lot faster to block in that shape and then carve out the shapes that I need. So I can go like that more so. And that works just a lot faster and more productive in the process that a lot of environment artists will use. It's usually called like carving out the shape. You almost treat it more like sculpture or painting than you would drawing. I'll just add in a little bit of this for just some visual interest, but I'm not gonna belabor it. You can make this as accurate as you'd like. I wouldn't, try and get completely accurate with your recreation, but it can be a good exercise to try and render these well enough that, it does clearly read as the other image when you look at it. But again, I'm not trying to draw out these branches the first time. I'm just drawing in the shape and then, punching out these little holes like that to imply leaves and whatnot. Okay, that's really all the further you need to go for this exercise. I could add in another layer for these background trees if we wanted, but I think you guys probably get the point at this point. Or let me know, does anyone have more questions about this exercise? Or if they'd like another example?
Um, um, I'm with the number. I'm with the microphone. Oh, I forgot. Um, Yatsu Sanchez, can you add the effect of fog?
Uh, so I'm not, let's see, for fog, I guess, yeah, so this foreground area does look a bit foggy. It could be that it is foggy. I think it's more so that there's it's environmental fog, I guess you could call it, where because things are receding in the distance, they kind of look foggy because there's so much atmosphere in between. Um, so I wouldn't add the fog because it'll kind of obscure how things are placed in space. I'm not really focusing on any soft edges or any of the lighting as far as, yes, this ground is a much lighter tone than, the tree or anything around it. But because it's on a same plane as far as the perspective of the image goes, I'm just kind of trying to ignore it just so I can look at this more as like an academic exercise where I'll kind of draw in the basic perspective of what this, the shape of this space is. So if you kind of imagine laying it, if you had a 3D model of this and you laid a grid over it, it would kind of give you general shapes like this. Obviously the tree moving in the distance. the background like that. So sorry, this is a very messy perspective grid. This is not a perspective class. But you can imagine how these are on, how these are laid out in space, sort of, where this actually does not line up very well. But you can see that the tree is on the same plane in space as this ground. So even though the values are very different, and they may be, you know, like I said before, the background here is a lot further back than the tree, but because we're trying to condense it into so few planes, that they're just going to have to blend together no matter what. Because if you tried to give everything its own plane, you would just end up with the exact same image. You would have basically this in a grayscale is what you would end up with. So this is just a very basic level of a gray, or of a tonal. I don't even have a tonal map. It's a more of a depth map of this. So the closer something is, we just want it to be a darker value further back, the lighter it's getting. But we have it so condensed, so it will make some interesting shapes. It's just kind of get you thinking about the 3D environment itself. Let's see, Tina. If the image seems to have two objects in the midground, would both be the same shade anyways? Would it be too much to give each its own shade? It depends. Depends on how many shades you want to add. Because I guess like I was saying before, you could keep taking this exercise further and further. Like for this one, I could add another plane. Like, because like these rocks, they're standing out a little further than, you know, this rock here. So you could, if I had my layers right, you could give that its own plane. Like this one could be a little closer. You could add another layer to the ground, because we just kind of have to draw the line somewhere as to where these planes end and begin when it's one continuous shape into the distance. So you could do it like that. You could add, you know, some of the tree here could be part of that. You know, even this one, it seems like this is a bit closer than the rest of this tree. So you could add that to this plane. And you can just kind of keep expanding on it. You can see how it already kind of reads more dimensionally after that one is added. So I don't know if it helps too much, but Tina, I would just kind of use your discretion. If it seems like a really clear division, I would add it in. Okay, I'm glad. I wasn't sure about that. But yeah, like you could add a plane around here to show that this tree is in front of the ground. Just depends on how far you want to take it. For this, I would recommend doing a couple in very simple terms, like these 3 or 4 values. But if you feel pretty comfortable with that, I'm going to let you be the judge of it. You can take it further into, you know, 6, 7 values, anything like that. Okay, I should also check. Is anyone working traditionally, or I don't know how many people are planning to draw along, but okay, you're gonna work traditionally? Okay. What is it you're working with as far as like pencil, pen, anything like that? Marker. Okay, and marker. Okay, that works well then. I was gonna say just if it was pen or pencil, I would recommend I guess it doesn't work for pen, but for pencil, you would want to hold it horizontal so you could shade in larger shapes like I'm doing with a very large brush. But with marker, you're probably already pretty set with that, as long as you keep the thumbnails quite small. Welcome, James. But yeah, I guess everybody ready to go for trying out some of this exercise yourselves?
I am blocking like the early one with the shotgun. And I have issues because I think the contrast is not. I don't understand the contrast of it. So what? It's like all mixing together. It's an interior. I could send it by message the call.
Let's. Did I name the reference image for that one? I tried to name most of them, and then I.
No, it's SB interior one.
Okay, let's see. Okay, actually, could you share your screen? Are you working on the same? Are you
Yep.
working on your computer? Okay, yeah, if I could just see which one you mean. And I guess this is kind of a free, uh, you can all begin the exercise, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
I'm just going to be working through some other people. If you have questions, go ahead and ask. But for the next, I would say, let's give it
Oh,
20 minutes.
yeah. I am already done this, and this one is like a bit
Oh,
shorter. I always like I I enjoy a lot doing like exterior work, but when it becomes an interior and with the reflection and the windows and all the things, it's like
right. Yeah, interiors,
messier.
I think, are a little bit harder with this exercise because um, you don't have as much depth to work with, and it's a
Yep.
lot more distracting to like look at all the various shades that are going on.
Yeah, I could also I like okay, this like close, so this should be like darker, and this one. But I don't know. I don't if you if you could like do this one, but if you want it and if it goes with your course, I'm not gonna.
No, I'll do a quick version of that one while people start on some of their own. And
Yeah,
I do see you guys with your raised hands, so I will get to those after this. I'll try and be quick because I realize we only have 40 minutes left in the class. But yeah, let me just take a shot at that one myself.
I'm gonna turn off the thing, the sharing the screen, or you have.
Got it. Yeah, because
Yeah,
I'll
you
share
have
my
it.
screen in just a moment.
Tell me when I should.
Oh, you're good
Right.
to go.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Because I may as well just start sharing my screen anyhow.
I think you are not sharing your screen.
Oh no, it's coming up. It's just
Okay.
for some reason
Okay.
it gives you a lot of time before it'll let you share your screen on the iPad. As though I have more embarrassing things on my iPad than my computer. This one's hard to fit on the screen. It's hard to get this working for when you have an audience as well. But okay. So yeah, it's a lot trickier, I think, with environments. I was trying this myself because there's so few overlapping things. You usually just have the one room. So you really have to be just kind of forceful with where you make your divisions. For me, I immediately think, okay, these flowers here are definitely in the foreground. There's nothing closer to the camera, so they have to be. I would add in this grass as well, even though, you know, it's a much lighter shade, but it doesn't matter what the shade is. I'm just going by where it is in space. Yeah, we just add in kind of a general idea that this is all closest to the camera. So there's a very slim just line of foreground there. After that, for a middle plane, I think this whole area makes for a good midground. Sometimes I'll work from the ground plane up to figure out where I should divide, you know, my midground with my foreground. So like for this, I think this whole plane right here makes for the midground, and this.
You're like saying like this one, this place and this place, but you're not showing the.
Oh, it's still not up.
Yeah. I was trying to tell you like when
Oh,
I
I got
was
it.
to a screen, I think I like
Okay.
messed that up. Sorry.
Yeah, I missed that part. Okay. I mean, I didn't get very far anyhow.
Yep. But now it's good.
There we go. Okay. This is all the further I got. So I just added in this basic set of the foreground with the flowers here. And I made a very arbitrary decision to add in the foreground right around here, even though there's no real indication, but because it's so close to the camera, I'm just considering it foreground. And right now I'm adding in midground here using this whole plane right here with the floor space. I'm just kind of using that as a guide for what I would consider the midground. And because I'm including that, I'll include all the walls as well. So those are also close to us. The roof then would be included. So a lot of the detail is going to get lost when you're doing these studies just on depth, because you are really having to simplify out all the details. And that's part of the point, is I don't want you to look at the details. I want you to just look at how it's composed in space and as a composition. So this is kind of you could end your composition like this. This could be it, as far as how you define the depth. Or if you're only going to 3 values, that is. I would add in this doorway because that goes much further back in here. You can see there's even some sunlight showing through. So I would add in just the doorway just to show that, you know, there is a way out of this room as well. But of course, we got the figure blocking the rest of that. So it's really crude, but that would be how you would render this in just 3 values. This is one where it would definitely benefit from adding more values in. So, like, obviously you could go in with the rest of this doorway. You would want to show that a bit. Because this doorway here goes much further back in space. So I could just block all of that in. And there we very quickly have a 4th level. And actually, you know, I should include the windows here because you are seeing all the way to the outside in this. So it's not like the wall itself is in this this mid-ground plane, but because all these windows are looking all the way outdoors, you would sort of, I think you should consider it as further back in space. I'm not doing this because the values of the windows are so light. This is just because you're seeing all the way into the very background of the piece through these windows. So just keep it really loose with this. I'm not trying to make the windows actually accurate or, that neat looking even. Just kind of showing that there's this whole wall here, and behind that is a space much further back because of it's so much lighter in the value. That's what that means. But yeah, it's not a pretty image. It's not meant to be pretty, but this is how you could conceptualize something like an interior within a value study like this. I guess, does that clear up anything, Mario?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, cool.
A lot, actually.
Okay, great. I know. Yeah, I also had a hard time when I tried doing this with interiors first. And even working through this, you saw I had to kind of think about it again. But that's what's good about the exercise is it keeps you looking back and it really makes you have to think about what you're doing. Let's see, how do I get to this cue?
Manuela, I think a question. Did you raise your hand, Manuela?
Yeah, just Manuela?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, what was your question?
So I was trying to get up to speed with the slides, and you mentioned something that I always kind of have had trouble with, or maybe it's difficult for me to understand, and it's that in environments you don't always have a focal point, which it's very tricky because when you have a character in your background, then that character becomes the focal point. But when you're designing just backgrounds, or when you just want to show the environment, even though there's characters, but none of those characters won't be, it's like a main character. You don't want that character, any character in specific to be your focal point. How do you make it that, because I feel like it could be tricky sometimes when you're trying to not put a focal point and then go into over rendering everything.
Okay, I think I know what you mean. I guess when you're talking about characters that you don't want as a focal point, are you just talking about like maybe like crowd scenes or anything in a city?
Yeah, it could be a crowd scene, or it could be an environment without a focal point. And in that case, how do you keep having the, how to say, the idea of what you should make important? Like if you have, because sometimes I have a list on my mind of, okay, value, color, composition, I go through it to evaluate my own process. And usually I also like it's all serving a focal point.
That's a great practice, by the way.
Yeah. When you don't have that, then how do you go through that list basically and check what is working and what is not?
Well, you can have like very like soft focal point, I would say.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be super obvious. Like this one here is a really good example of that, where there's not like a clear focal point to this, but the image still reads really well as like a 3D space.
Yeah.
And it has this very soft focal point right here where you have this lantern on the boat, where your eye might not directly go to that, but it will notice it eventually, and it is a stronger image as far as, it is very light against very dark background. But it's not so strong because you have all these other similar light spots around it.
Okay, yeah.
And like this one's another example where like you have a character here, but he's not really the focal point at all. He's just there to provide scale for how big the environment is. If anything, there would be a focal point or focal area around this, but it's not super strong.
Mhm.
It's just very lightly implied that, like, yeah, this is interesting. It's, you know, the main shape in the composition, and it has most of the
Yeah,
contrast, but it's not
it's slightly more defined than the rest of the
exactly like, yeah,
drawing.
like this shape here, it's not really defined at all. This is hidden in so much atmosphere. There's some good examples for, I would look at a lot of background art for animation, because those are very specifically meant to not have a focal point.
Mhm.
I think, yeah, I definitely have some examples in the reference folder. I can find some. Or actually, let me just share this tab instead. This is just a very easy example that a lot of these backgrounds, they won't have, you know, there's nothing clearly here to focus on, even though there is a lot of interesting stuff, but they still have things laid out in some nice ways where they're positioned well, and but they're not positioned so well that, you know, like this lamp could be really bright, everything could be a lot darker, and then your eye would instantly look over here.
Yeah.
But they don't want that, so they kind of have the colors much more evenly across the whole painting, and that way when the characters come through, it'll be much more obvious.
In that case, would you say that just having the values define shape and distance, it's what I should concentrate on in order to avoid making a focal point, instead of values serving one focal point, basically?
Yeah, I think that's a really good approach to it. Like this one too, this is a nice example where they do have a lot of depth, and they have really nice value control, where there is like these areas over here, they're a lot less interesting, versus in here, there's a lot more contrast. So the values are still well organized, and it's a very well composed image, but it doesn't have a clear, like, this is where, or this is the thing you need to look at. But you're more so designing backgrounds for directing where you should look when we do put something in. So like this one, you can tell, like, it does have a really nice focal area, like right around here.
Yeah.
Your eyes going there, there's just nothing to really look at. But then once you add in characters, then it's like, oh, this is a very well composed image.
Okay, yeah, I'm getting it.
Just
I love your pointer, by the way. It's so cute.
Oh no, I forgot. Like I'm so used to it, I forget that it's a seal.
It's so cute.
It's
love
a catfish.
It's a dead fish and then a seal.
It's also perfect for this this explanation, because it becomes the character.
He's the little guy.
Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, it was definitely on purpose then. That's why.
Great.
Sounds
Okay.
good.
I think that I can now kind of
Okay,
like
that helps a little
figure
bit.
out
Yeah. It's still hard to understand versus like when you do want and when you don't want a focal area.
Yeah.
I'd say when in doubt, it's good to have a focal area, unless you're very specifically making, you know, like background art for a comic panel or animation.
Yeah, it's kind
So
of
it's good you're already in the practice for that.
it's kind of that what I've been having trouble in, because if I just want to show like a just the background, just the location of my characters before showing the characters, and I'm like, okay, but it shouldn't like have specific focal point. And I have kind of trained a lot into making the focal point very clear. But then I have to like switch gears.
Reel it back a little bit.
Yeah. Thank you.
Of course. Okay, I see there's a couple more questions here. But real quick, because the class technically will be over at 7 my time. I guess it's 8. I don't know if most of you are in Toronto or not, but I just wanted to get through the very last bit of the lecture and just give you something to leave off on for how to continue a project, or how to, I guess, continue from something like your grayscale environments. So I'll get through that, and then if you guys want to stick around, I'll still be around to answer questions. Just for the recording, I need to get the rest of this in here. Okay, and you guys are still free to keep working on the rest of your environment thumbnails and whatnot, and I can take a look at those. Let's see. Get back to where we were. Oh, include a break time, but we don't have time for a break. This is just how I would break down some of the steps for approaching environment design from the beginning to the end. I think a lot of artists will work similar to this, but this is more specifically how I work through in design. I would call this step 0 first off, where I think it's great practice to get into doing studies of different environments. Quite often I'll do it from real photographs, so you can get that authenticity, and you're kind of designing images on your own rather than copying someone else's illustrations. You know, if you were to, for this one, I was drawing working on a project where I planned on doing some bamboo forest. So instead of looking up other artists' ideas for bamboo forests, I just went to what the actual things look like from actual photographs and kind of came up with my own interpretations of that. And that's just a great way to prepare for future projects and expand your visual library for what you can come up with off the top of your head. As far as starting an actual project, just expect to do hundreds and hundreds and millions of thumbnails. Once you get fast at it, it's such a crucial skill to have when you're doing environments or doing, you know, any sort of illustration. As long as you can get the full image out quickly, that's going to make you work so fast. And it's so valued in the industry. This was, I can't remember what the project, it was just some illustrations I was going to do of a girl in some various nature scenes. And you can see how rough these are, for one, but also just how varied they are, where I'm not just taking the same image and, you know, slightly changing the values. I'm doing completely different scenes. I'm trying completely different camera angles. Like this one is totally, you know, upward angled. This one, it might be a little harder to read, but this one's complete downward angle where the girl is here. She's looking into the water at her reflection. Just trying whatever I really think of, putting her in a forest, things like that. Playing with different shapes, seeing how they feel as a composition, like this big sweeping shape of the tree. These are just some smaller, I just tried to include these just to show how many thumbnails you can expect to do. Even for these single illustrations, I did maybe like 50 or 60 different thumbnails. And that's just to get all the bad ideas out first, so you can get to your good ideas, is how I think of it. So after you have a couple thumbnails that you actually like, you can go into refining that. So you can take the same thumbnail that you enjoyed and kind of just tweak some things, see how you can make the composition stronger or play with the lighting a bit more. In this example, I was happy with the composition. I was just trying to figure out how I wanted my values and my lighting to read. So you can see I'm like changing. In this one, this house has darker wood on it and a lighter roof. This one, it's a bit more muted. This one has a really strong edge light. And they all kind of give off a different idea for how the image is going to turn out and where the focus would be. In the end, I ended up going with a final design similar to this one, where you have really light area right here, reflection on this. It's hard to tell because it's so rough, but it's like the overhang of a tin roof. and it's just a really bright area to focus on. This was intended to be a background for an animation piece, or like a mock-up for an animation piece. So it doesn't have a super strong focal point like you're talking about, Manuela, but it does have an idea of where you would want to look, where you can look up here, there's some contrast, but also you'll probably want to look around here because there will be characters that will, you know, walk around here or be in the shot here. Yeah, this is just kind of you nailing down how you want the actual image to look. These next two steps, shape language and color, you can do them in any order, really. I just had to pick an order. For me, this is where I will go in with the gradient map or the color blend mode I mentioned. I'll use my grayscale image like this and just go over it in a color blending mode to, you know, see how I can add some color to this while still keeping true to my values. But once I've done that, I won't just keep repeating that and, you know, trying different colors on that same blending mode. I'll usually take the whole image, color select from that with, you know, an eyedropper tool, and try and make tweaks on my own to see what I can get out of that, because grayscale to color is a really useful way to begin, but if you don't start picking colors on your own eventually, you'll never get the true range of values. It's hard to explain, but it's how the algorithm, or however they code the blending layers, you can never get the full range of values based on that. I could explain it in a while, but it's too much for now. But in general, if you want the full range of color, you will have to be able to pick the colors on your own and blend them on your own. But it's a great starting off point. These are some more examples of how I like to use. These were done with gradient mapping. That's another tool you can use in pretty much any drawing software. Just trying out different color combinations to see how they affect the mood of a piece, where, you know, some of these, they feel a lot more somber. These feel a bit more dreamy, a little lively, things like that. This one also interesting. You can see how some of these feel a lot warmer versus how cool this or this might feel. Even though it's still a winter scene, this one feels a lot more inviting and warm. So yeah, those are all things you should definitely try out with color. It can add a whole other layer of depth to your piece once you can get into that. And then shape language is another big step before going to your final illustration. Once I have my general composition ruled out, like this is the same shack from this idea, this project I was working on. So once I had that composition laid out and kind of the values decided, I wanted to go in and really understand what I wanted the shack to look like and how I wanted it to feel. So here I'm just I'm not wasting time by drawing it into a background. I'm just drawing the shed itself to see what appeals to me, what feels right, you know, trying out different shape language. Like this one's much blockier. Didn't really like how that went. I tried out some really narrow, and I guess you could call it more like fantasy style ones, like folksy. I was basing them off of like witch huts, like Baba Yaga, and they looked cool, but they weren't quite what I was going for. So yeah, this is kind of a collection of things I use as reference for this piece as an example. And you can see there's still things that carry over from references that don't quite make it, where, you know, I decided, okay, I don't want it to actually be a witch's hut, but there's still some influence to that, like the crook in the roof here, or how I laid out the clapboard on the side of the house, where it can have a little influence, and it can definitely like enhance your design when you have these more disparate reference materials. Same thing with this. I was looking at a lot of kind of bayou houses made of a lot of tin siding, and just kind of put together piece by piece almost. And I thought it lent itself really well to this. This is the style of background art in Amphibia. And they have these really nice, similarly swampy looking backgrounds with really whimsical shapes. So I wanted to try combining this kind of dirty, ugly swamp house shape design with these really friendly, cute shapes. And that's a great way to just kind of come up with really novel ideas for your projects. Okay, yeah, once you have all the groundwork laid, you can actually start sketching out your final project. This is an example I had for the one I was doing, this animation background. You can see I have the house pretty well understood as a 3D object. As far as like how the roof slopes back, how they connect together, where the house hits the water line that it's sitting on. And it's very light in this image. I should have brightened it up a bit, but you can see I have a perspective or a horizon line right here, and along with all the perspective lines laid out so that I can make the space feel really believable, even if I'm using these very cartoony, loose shapes. Like, you can see all these trees are sitting on the right plane in space. You can just see how they're moving back like that. Yeah, this is just kind of where you nail down how things should sit so they look believable. After that, you can start rendering. This one, it's such a broad topic, rendering is, so I can't give you too much advice on that. It really depends on what sort of piece you're doing. Like if I was to try and give you a rundown of what rendering I'm doing for this piece, it wouldn't apply unless you're also doing this very flat style of shading. Whereas if you're doing something like a concept art piece where you're painting it in and you have all these nice transitions, it's, it's the advice won't apply, but basically just finish the image as you should, and keep it true to your original sketch. So at all times, you're just kind of looking back to see like, okay, are my values still working? Is the composition still working? If you change, the position of anything, just keep making sure that the structure of it is holding up. And then after that, you can get to just finishing the project. And unfortunately, while I was putting together the slides for this presentation, I don't know if I deleted it then or if I just realized I had deleted it before, but I lost the files to this final background. So you just kind of have to imagine it finished. But yeah, at that point, you just kind of add in all the extra details you need. Up here is a little thumbnail of a further revised thumbnail that would be more indicative of what the final piece looked like. You can see there's a lot of atmospheric fog and whatnot, and that helps to kind of block out these very kind of noticeable shapes in the trees here where it might be a little too noisy looking as far as how much detail there is. So in the final...
That's tragic.
I know. I'm still not over it, but I'll finish it one day, or I'll refinish it one day. But yeah, that's I guess the general process. I think a lot of the foundational skills are what you're going to learn in the very first steps of design, is in making those thumbnails and laying out good composition, understanding how to direct the eye, and all of that. This is just one final, or I guess a final iteration on the same exercise where if you want to, instead of working from those references, you can kind of block out your own environments with still the very defined foreground, midground, and background. But because we only have 3 minutes left, I'm not going to require anybody, I can't require you to do anything, it's a free class, but I'm just going to let you decide if you want to do this exercise. You have access to the slides so you can kind of see the process itself, or you can go back and reference that after the class is over. But yeah, I guess I will just say if you need to leave, or if you just, want to go, please feel free to. And I'm going to stick around for a bit to answer questions. But thank you guys so much for coming. I thought maybe nobody would show up, and that would have been fine as well, but this is actually a lot more fun to actually have some people to talk with. Okay, yeah, now I'm just gonna start going over some of your guys' questions.
That's this question from Wong. Do you like answer it?
Oh,
Like,
yes. See, will it provide feedback and
Provide feedback?
paintovers? Yes. I will start doing that now.
So I have to upload it now into the.
Yeah, if you would like some feedback, I can definitely give you
Yeah,
some
I like
advice
it.
for that.
You like me?
For sure. And so yeah, I'll look into some of these. I just want to see if I could answer any other questions quick that people had before I get into some of these paintovers. Let's see who else was in the queue. Like, I guess James, what was anything I could help you with?
Hi, Donna. Good evening.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm sorry I came late. I actually forgot of the class and
No, that's fine.
saw the notification on my mail, and I was like, "Oh shoot, I was supposed to be in this class."
No, all good. I also I almost missed the class today because in the first email there was a typo and it said it started an hour later than it really did. So I thankfully caught that, but yeah, otherwise may not have been a class today.
So okay. So I
all
was hoping to find out, like, since I missed the first part of the first portion of the section, I wanted to know if I will also be able to get the slide.
Oh yeah, definitely. If you look in the chat here, I pinned a link to a Google Drive folder, and in there I have a bunch of reference images for some art you can work off of, as well as the full presentation that's in here. You can just look back on that. But there's also there will be just a recording that everybody will get eventually of the full class.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so yeah, it'll be all recorded as well, the full lecture with the slides.
Okay. That sounds
Yeah.
good then.
Of course, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Oh, and Vertina, oh gosh, yeah, I should have mentioned before, before people started leaving. This is kind of a teaser for a full class that I will be teaching in December. Not a free class, unfortunately, but if you are interested in learning a lot more in-depth stuff as far as environment design goes, where we could get into, learning how to do lighting, how to do picking color and whatnot, and just a lot more in-depth as far as like working through a full project. Just check out on the website if you're interested. I'll be doing, it'll be one time a week for 10 weeks, I believe. Very similar to this. I guess, I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know why I wrongly assumed that all of you know MTM well enough. That's the college that I went to and that I'm now teaching at.
No, I'm from Chile, so
Fair.
I have a friend in I think Toronto's from Canada, or not? Yeah, I have a friend.
Sounds like better weather, at
in
least.
Canada, but I actually that friend of mine has told me about this scope.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. There's just a weird assumption I have in my head that you all know MTM well, or you're about to go there. I should. Is anybody planning on attending there, or?
If you can like leave a link to that, if you can, I would like to save it to know. Here's my course. It's one. It is, and like I'm thing
Or sorry, what was that? A link to
your course.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just dropped one in the chat
Oh,
a
okay.
second ago. I'll pin that as well. I don't know what the pinning actually does. I don't know if that makes a difference, but yeah, so that's the course. Check it out. It'll be a lot of this. I'm gonna get, unless anyone has another quick question, I'm just gonna look at some of your guys's work in the folder. Was that?
Yeah, I do have a question.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So, because I was an MTM for comic books, and as you know, a lot of, maybe you don't know, I don't know, but a lot of our practice was very much going more into learning environment and perspective in a very Marvel DC way, so very realistic for the most part, or very stiff in the way that it's portrayed, very realistic into the proportions and shapes that we were using. And I'm trying to like get away from that.
That's fair.
And yeah, and while trying to experiment with shapes and with other trying to give my environments a different look, I've been wondering how to match the look to the characters. So
Okay, like keeping that, I guess that would fall under a lot of like shape design.
exactly, because we were looking at some Gravity Falls environments, which are gorgeous, and it's so, to me, it's still like not clear how you do that, how you make an environment that it's a character on its own and it's distinguishable from other content or other works of art, other artists, other comic books or shows or whatever, and still make it fit your characters as well.
Okay, that's a very interesting question. Just because I know exactly what you mean, but it's really hard to put into words how you would approach that process. I would love to find some examples of that. Let me see. I mean, well, I guess you went through the comics program, so what were you, Manuel, were you a year ahead of me?
I think so.
That's what I thought. I thought you had a different last name though. That's why I was like, oh, it can't be the same Manuela. But I know we like barely met because we never.
Oh, I remember you very well by your art because I was always like so impressed, and I'm like, God, this is so good.
Oh, thank you.
All your paintings since school were amazing.
Thank you. Anyways, I guess because I came from a similar background where I also drew pretty realistically, so I kind of fit better into the comics program.
Yeah.
But I think when we went through cartooning with Megan, especially, that's when I really understood like, oh, okay, this is what shape language is all about, and figuring out, just how much you can exaggerate and kind of pull those shapes together.
Yeah, because Megan's class was amazing, and I feel like I absorbed those concepts very well for characters, and now I want to apply it to environments as well, which I didn't get a lot to do while I was at Max. So now I'm trying to figure that out.
Right, trying to catch up with that. I
Yeah.
can see that. I guess you can start with like really basic shape language again with that, where you're like, okay, I'm gonna make a whole environment out of circles, or I'm gonna make a whole environment out of these kind of, I don't know, like trapezoid sort of shapes where it's like really pointing upward and kind of a bit wonky, but you can just kind of choose something arbitrarily and go off of that to give it a very like clear character to your environment. That's how I started, at least, where I just didn't really know what to do, and then
yeah, and that's the thing, like when I was at Max, the style that I had at the moment fit very well, kind of like, again, that very strict realistic DC Marvel style for environments. Like my characters still fit that, but now that I'm trying to like experiment a little bit more, it doesn't happen anymore.
Oh, like your characters are getting more card shady as well?
Exactly.
Well, that's good.
And I need to fit the environment as well into that.
Yeah, let me think on that one, because I'm sure I'd have some better exercises for it, but it is really hard to just kind of, how do you approach, learning style?
Yeah, basically.
Okay, so yeah, I'll think on that one, get back to you, because now, I actually know you, so
Yay. Alrighty. Thank you.
yeah. Okay, now finally, I'll get to some of these paint overs. Just to give you an idea, I'm doing, whose was this again? Was it?
Oh, it was mine.
Oh yeah, okay.
I think my main concern is that I feel like I'm translating the values a bit too literally.
I can see what you mean. It's because yeah, in some of these, what you have is you are doing some very observant like value studies, like in this one right here. That's not, as far as it goes, this isn't a plane, as in this is still one wall here.
Yeah.
This is just the value change. So this is actually a really nice value study. And if you're more comfortable doing value studies, you can do that as well. This is just more of a, in a way, it's a bit more of like an annoying exercise to do. I hate to say that, but sometimes they're more effective if they're more annoying. So if I were to approach this one as where I'm treating it more like a study about just the planes that we're looking at, I would go just set up my canvas here.
I think another, I also like want to improve my skill in like grouping values. So I also took this exercise and like trying to see how values are grouped in like professional work, but I still feel like the way I group the values, it's still kind of like all over the place a bit.
Well, actually, no, I'm just going to kind of look at this as far as the values go. No, I think you did a really good job observing the values in here, like especially how you kind of picked out the doors, where you can tell like, yeah, this isn't, you could have just made this door one value, but instead you can see how it's darker right in here versus the lit side of the bed in this upper part. I think maybe something like this could have been added in if you're going for the values. Just some small things like that. But as far as it goes, this is a pretty good value study.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. I just wish I could cover value more in this because it's one I really, you really want to get into in detail and go over, especially, trying to see things like lost and found edges and going into gradients like that. But that's why I just picked this exercise for this class, just because it's one that I think anybody could benefit from. It's just, and it's a lot easier to kind of get the concept in a short amount of time, where I would love to get into value, but I could get into value too much. Okay, thank you for coming, Tina. What good one. But if I were to approach this, this one you've done as a value study instead with the planes for the foreground, midground, background. This one's not too difficult as far as some of these interiors go. I would count this whole floor as part of that, along with again, the walls here, I would count on the same plane, or in the same just general plane. We have to group it into 3 areas.
7.
Can just cut out the window because we are seeing all the way out to the background. So yeah, not much to this one as far as a 3-value study would go. I guess if I were, how about I'll give this one a go as a value study more so. See how that is. So with a value study, it's a good practice to actually try and match the correct values versus just arbitrarily picking a middle, a light and a dark. Okay, so I usually like to start with my lightest lights and my darkest darks just to set what the scale is for the image as far as, you know, nothing can be darker than this, nothing can be lighter than that. Just a good way to kind of organize it. I don't know. I guess, did anybody have any other questions while I'm working on some of these?
How many values are you limiting yourself to?
For this one, I'm gonna try and keep it to 4 just to make it a little trickier because I think the lower you go in values, the trickier it can be. I guess how many did you use in this one?
Just 4.
4. Okay. Or 1, 2, 3. Oh yeah, you did. I don't know why I can't count. Yeah, it just depends on where you set your values. Where, for something like this, like you chose to keep the shadow and the desk similar enough that they can be the same color. In mine, I think the desk is closer in value to the rest of this baseboard. So I'm instead just going to group it with all of that. And I might just even forget the shadow itself. Or actually, no, I might keep the shadow in there because it does read pretty strongly against this white. Yeah, like if I squint my eyes, I do think you have this pretty much nailed down.
Mhm.
Yeah, you can just kind of slightly tweak. I would probably add in this whole picture frame on the side
Okay.
because that is a pretty big area of a lighter color and it fills up that space nicely.
Mhm.
As well as the poster in here, that's pretty white. If you compare it to, say, the bed here, you know, it's almost lighter than the bed, so I would add that as well. But a lot of this is just kind of nitpicking at this point, so
And
I think you did some very nice value studies here.
I had some like issues with like the first image just because there's so much like gradients going on in that image, and it was kind of hard for me to decide how do I want to like separate the values.
Right. Just kind of have to take a moment to look at it as well. I really like this shape here that you chose.
Mhm.
Because there is another option where you can kind of make a couple gradients here with these pillars because they're a bit lighter than you can see the
Oh.
shadowy area around here.
Yeah.
So if you add these in with a bit of a darker, you know, the second lightest tone, it can imply that, you know, once they're in light, they become this pure white, but when they're in the shadow, they do still kind of show up. Versus something like, you know, you could even have the top of the door in there. Yeah, took the time to make that fit properly. Same thing in here, you can kind of continue, since this is such a light strip, just kind of continue it through. I'd also keep this whole edge a lot lighter because if you compare this to this, they are pretty similar as far as the value goes. Even though it looks like one is in a lot of shadow, but because it's this almost white material, when it's in shadow, it's still just as bright as when these stairs are in light. See, sorry, I didn't see this question, Camilla. How do you take these concepts and apply them to a more animation layout context? Does it come down to simplification? Quite a bit, yes. Yeah, most of this does just apply straight to designing for layout. I wish I had some layout mock-ups I did for my portfolio before. Don't have those on hand, but most of it will be the same. You'll be designing, again, you want a good flow around the room. Like some of those backgrounds I was showing before, they still have a nice composition to them as far as where your eye is meant to look. It's just more so there's not a subject matter there to look at. It's just kind of a frame for where you will put characters or something like that. It's just that these rules all do apply. They're just not as strict to layouts, where sometimes you can just get away with having no focal area at all, as long as you kind of lay out the perspective in a very solid way. I guess, yeah, that might be a better distinction, is that perspective is a bit more important for when you're laying out animation, especially depending on the show. Like if you're doing something with like, if you're working on like a Marvel, TV show, you have to lay out a lot of like action scenes and whatnot. You have to really nail down the perspective of your scene versus some of these landscapes for concept art where it's not as clear. It doesn't have to be as solid as to where things are in space. It's just, as long as you're implying that mood and the feeling, that you might need to hand off to like lighting artists or something. That's all sort of it just depends on what you value more in these environment design skills. Yeah, and yeah, as far as like simplification, you can do this no matter what. You don't have to simplify if it's a very heavily detailed animated show. You can just have these very rendered, very value control heavy pieces. If you're having this very like cinematic shots for like, if you're doing, especially if you're doing something in film where you are composing these very organized images with your backgrounds, you may not have to simplify anything, and you're still just getting in all those principles. But even if it was a very simplified animation style, all those rules still apply. Like the background I was showing you, where it's like this one, where it is very simple shapes and like the line art is very simple, but it's just it still has all this framing. You still have these little devices around here to kind of lead your eye. You have light pooling. That's something that comes to lighting, where you're directing the eye just with like these pretty like classic, and it's a very like forced way to bring your focus somewhere, but it works really well and it often looks really nice. So that's the same thing where I'm pooling the light, even though it's very simple shapes and simple shading. It just brings you right in here and on the dock and whatnot. But yeah, you can do this at any level of detail, from full realism to very cartoony. Oh, actually, I should check out some other people's work in here. Let's see who's still on the call to be sure. Okay, let me get to Tamlin. This is really nice.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is just a really very clear example. I can definitely see how you are layering these planes.
You explained it well, so
Oh, it's a simple exercise. No, I really like how you also used your brush in. Oh, I don't have my gesture here, but I like how you just kind of use the brush to punch out these little holes. But I don't know if other people think of it like that, but that's how I think of it, where I make the background shape, and then to get those negative spaces in between things, I just kind of punch them out like that. That works really well, especially in all these this mid-ground area.
perfect.
Yeah. I guess one of the only things I would add in is you can see these flowers on the right. Just based on like the values they're at and where they are in the frame, I would imagine that they're on the same plane as these other flowers, if not
Mhm.
closer. So that would be my only critique, is I was just add those in to this foreground layer, this darkest layer.
Oh, okay. I see. I see.
But yeah, I see they do kind of just get lost against that, the dark rock and whatnot around there.
Mhm.
Yeah, very nice work. Let me see your other
Thank you.
one. Yeah, this is, again, I'm just like, this is also very well laid out. I like that you didn't get caught up with trying to fit the character in or make them stand out much. You just have that little bit poking out, because
Yeah.
that's all they're doing in the composition.
I was correct in thinking that it was mostly just the water that was the foreground, right? That was
Definitely,
a good-
yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, and yeah, it's up to your discretion. Like you added in the rocks here. I think that's a perfectly fine decision, especially considering how you've added the person in. I would say it would have to be one or the other, where either you kind of draw the line like at these this grass here.
Mm.
But I think I prefer where you chose it, just because it's a bit more interesting to include these rocks on the right versus just having a purely flat foreground.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, finally get to Mario. Okay, these are looking good. When you were doing these, were you intending them to be value studies?
Yep, but I got like if I add this and this and this, but yeah, like shape study and value studies, I think.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I'm totally open to people doing value studies. I would have loved to have made value studies the recommended exercise. I just didn't want it to be too, it would have been too much to explain. So I will critique these as that.
Yep, I think it's fine.
These are looking pretty good. Or just one of the first things that stands out to me is oftentimes you can kind of check your work with this. So for this one, I'm just going to show you. Actually, this is a nice trick I'll show you with some layering. When I'm working on something like adding color to my thumbnails and I need to keep referencing how the values look, a lot of times I'll just make a layer on top of my entire image, like this right here. And I'll set it to, where is it? I'll set it to saturation all the way down here. And then you can just, any sort of neutral gray, it doesn't matter if it's, black or white. You can just cover the whole image, and that'll just give you a really quick way to turn on and off values for your image. So as you're still working on it, you can, make changes and then check if the values are looking right. But I just wanted to compare this one. If you can see now, I'm sure it's obvious, but the spaceship is slightly darker than the rest of the sky around it in this top one.
Yep.
I think I think it comes off as lighter because you have this shadow, or this lit form here. Why do I keep choosing a pink for my color?
My thinking was if it is like harder, it should be lighter, but doesn't necessarily behave like that. That was my thinking.
There. Okay. I guess so. Were you doing like a tonal study? Were you trying to get the right shadows in this, or were you trying to do like the depth exercise that I recommended, where you're mapping out those planes?
I think that it's more accurate like
Okay.
that with the value.
Okay, so you were intentionally adding in, thinking about the value.
Yep.
Okay, that's fair. Okay, so yeah, then this does read well. The only thing that throws me off is the sky would just have to be lighter. Like this can be that light, that's fine. It's just because the sky is even further back, it would just have to be even darker, which is just a really kind of simple fix. Like it might look more like that. And then, because otherwise, if it's going according to like the rules of how this progresses in depth, if the sky is darker than this, then that implies that it's closer. Just as far as the exercise goes, you know, it could be that you have a darker sky with lighter things in the distance if you're doing it tonally. And only other thing is I wouldn't include any of this right here. I know it's indicating some things right here, especially with this shadow form, but because they're pretty much on the same plane,
That was tricky. I didn't know if they adding that or don't.
Right. It's also especially tricky because you have this one that's kind of pointing, it's coming towards the camera.
Yep.
So that's up to you whether you want to include it at all or if you want to include part of it. Kind of like in my demo when I had to make a weird decision on where to end the foreground with that tree. I don't have the example up anymore, but where I just had to kind of cut it in the middle of the trunk and decide, okay, this is foreground. And then as the tree goes backwards or back into the environment, I'm just going to call that the midground. You could do a similar thing with this shape here, where you could say, well, this is closest to me. And it seems like it's on the same plane as a lot of this. So I might cut it off like right there and include some of this in my foreground. Just the general shape of it. But after that, it just kind of cuts off just like that. So that this could be my foreground. I mean, if I'm just going strictly with how far the depth is, I would just kind of count all of this together.
Yeah, and the light was also like tricky because it's coming from the left, I think. No, right. From the right, but it's not like behind the scene. It's like right to the right, like in the middle. And it's confusing.
Yeah, it definitely is, especially with how just busted my knee. Especially with how they've kind of pulled the lighting here, where it's a very, again, this is just what I was talking about with my example with my environment. They very contrivedly had the lighting just in here, where you would think if the lighting's coming from this direction, then all of this sand would also be getting light, you know, and like these things would cast some shadows, but
Oh,
they'd still hit light. But they're just doing it in a very forced way to draw your eye only to here. Because if you did have all that, oh, bye, Ina. Thank you for coming.
it could be from the back with like a giant building.
Yeah, like it could just be, you know, like one of these is in the way, something like that. You know, you can just kind of assume whatever. You can just, even if it's outdoors, you can always just say like, oh, well, there's a very convenient cloud right there. But
Yeah.
But it can make it confusing to figure out where the lighting is coming from. For
I
this.
know if you recommend, I tend to blend a lot of things when I don't have to. I think it's right. Like I don't have to blend it too much.
Blended, like, do you mean like doing some gradients, or do you mean like how you've kind of blended, like grouped these pieces together?
It's like you have like your mid-tone, your darker tone, and your light tone. If you're studying audio, you shouldn't mix it. It's like a professor actually told me that, and didn't get it, and I don't think if it's right or no.
I think it's okay. It's you want to eventually study the full range of value, but it really helps when you're starting out to break it down into these really simple planes. That way, it really gets you to focus on how the values are compared to each other. Where if you look at this piece, right, this dome, you might get kind of lost looking at all these light values where it has like a really slight highlight up here and it's darker under there. When if you're just learning, you want to really just think about it as one tone. And then when you try and compare it, like if I try and guess what the values are for this, it's a lot easier to look at it as one big picture. So if I guess what the value is for this dome here, I would guess something like that. And then it's a good exercise to then just try and look at something else in the image, like try and see what this is, because they're right next to each other. I can kind of try and gauge it with my eye. And I would say it's close to something like that. And then you can kind of look at it and try and judge, like, oh, does it need to be lighter? Does it need to be darker? For me, I would think it needs to be a bit lighter. Something maybe like that. And then you can, this is where that saturation layer can really help, where I could take those same colors, put them on the canvas where they should be, and see, okay, so actually my first instinct was a lot better, where I had it a bit darker in this area. So it's just a really interesting thing to try and be able to visualize these values when you're having to also deal with all this color and these small transitions. So as you go along, you can kind of do so more with the full range, but it really helps to just break it down into these simple planes like this. Like, I'll ask, have you ever done like a NOTAN study, Mario?
A what?
Have you ever heard of a NOTAN study?
Notes.
NOTAN.
Nope.
Okay. Those are a really fun exercise to do, and they're fun as in annoying. I don't know why I called it fun, but they help you really understand and like be able to discern value from one another.
No time.
Yeah, I'll just show you. It's where you look at an image and you only use black and white.
Oh,
So you really have to break it down. Like, yeah, like this is a great example. You have all these values and you just have to choose where it should be, at what cutoff in the scale of like, black to white. You have all these grays. You have to decide, okay, at this point, everything darker than this will be black. Everything lighter than this will be white. And it's really like an exercise for your eyes to be able to discern that.
it's like a silhouette exercise with value, right? So how can I put two colors and still keeping the reading of the image or don't or not? It's like
It depends on the image. It might not read as well. It probably won't read as well if you do it like this, but you're not trying to make a good looking image. You're just trying to exercise your eye and train your eye to see the values better. So it's less of a skill of like actually being able to draw or paint. It's more being able to see color better and see, light and dark better. It's weird to explain it like that, but
yeah, like simplifying. This is light. This is the shadows. You go from there, but this is the beginning. This is the main thing, right?
right. Yeah.
The basics
just being able to-
of the basics.
Because then once you can kind of nail down NOTAN, you can go more so into comparing, well, okay, if I call this the darkest possible and I call these areas the lightest possible, I can choose a point in the middle where I can say, okay, these are kind of a mid-tone. You can add that in, and then you can continue. You can add in some of those softer transitions. And at some point, you are just painting in grayscale. but you have to be able to see the values in what you're looking at.
I like it. I would try it.
Yeah, those are
I like annoying exercise. I like them. I like
good.
them very much.
I didn't for a very long time. I mean, I still don't, but you know, you have to do them.
For me, it's
This is
like,
nice. This person was doing them with some concept art, actually.
hey, that's me. So no turn painting or no turn more turn
Yeah,
exercise.
try out some of those.
Any like page or this or
No, I don't. I just learned it in a class.
Really?
Just look up, any artist really, anyone that's has some good value control. A lot of the ones in the reference folder should have a lot of those as well. But also any fine artists, any like actual painters, they will have some really good value control in there.
very continue. That's pretty good.
Okay, we're coming up on 8 o'clock soon. I did not forget though, I wanted to show you a bit about actually I'll get up the iPad because it's more annoying to present with. But I wanted to show you a little bit about what you were talking about with color. When you were mentioning how do you fit something into your palette when it might not be the right color.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Did you forget your own question?
Yeah, because I was in a course, like I was like trying to do a background, and then it's like, well, how we do this? I have a very complicated background, and I don't know how to do it. And my professor was like, "Oh yeah, so you mix it sound good like this, but hi, hi."
Let me find that. So it's gonna take just a quick second.
This quick question: do you have like a artist Instagram?
Oh yeah, wait, I never even got to the
Yeah, but if you don't want to
I got
use
to go to the final slide of my
it,
presentation where I say thank you.
oh,
Let me get there quick. There we go. There we are. I'll just leave that up for a
let's
bit.
learn that.
But yeah, if you guys have questions outside of class, if you want to keep doing these exercises and want some feedback,
Oh, really?
yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Especially because I'll be preparing a lot of different materials for the actual class that starts in December, so I have a lot of that on hand already.
The price of the price, it's on dollars for 450 that's Canadian dollars or dollars like that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Canadian. I'm American,
Canadian.
so I still have a hard time with.
Yeah, it's a little
It
bit.
is Canadian dollars.
Okay, thank you. I don't know why it wouldn't be. Obviously, it's a Canadian school, but
Yeah,
it's
because I
still hard
got
for me to understand.
pesos. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I the because I'm Colombian, so I have also to like transfer
yeah,
my to Canadian dollars. It's from pesos to Canadian dollars. It's quite a bit, I must say.
it's tricky.
Yeah, but yeah, at least I don't know. I'm very glad they were able to let me do this free course. Just because I think, I don't know, it is a very handy thing to just get a taste for it at least. And what was I looking up?
Oh, here it is. Oh, there's a monkey here.
I will have to go, but then I'm gonna be messaging you on Instagram just so you know it's me.
Please
Uh,
do. Thank you. Yeah, I would love to see some more of what you guys do.
Yeah, thank you for this. This was amazing. 'Cause again,
I
yeah,
have a question for you.
Sure.
If you don't mind, I did, did you go to Canada to study? Then Colombia?
I did.
Okay, if you got any information about that, because I want
Yeah.
to, I don't know how to.
Yes, for sure.
Can you give me
So
like any
I'm gonna put my Instagram on the message, and you can send me uh a message whenever you want, and I can answer whatever question you have about the process or
Oh,
about
yeah,
the school, because I also went to Maximat.
yeah. Thank you.
I think actually there's a couple of people who had contacted me because of that.
Yeah, because it's tricky. It's like for tour, it's like a bingo with the.
Yeah, and Canada is very particular um about the whole process. So, but the school, at least in my experience, was very good at helping me with all that. So yeah, whatever question you have, let me know.
Okay.
And Donna, thank you so much for this. It's very, very cool. And I was always like, I love your painting so much, and I follow you on Instagram, and I love it.
Thank you so much. I can't believe I didn't even realize it was you till halfway through. I don't know where I thought. Is your middle name Otero?
It is.
Oh, okay, that's what I saw that for the registration, and I was like, no, it's just another Manuela. But I was like, no, yeah, it was you.
No, it was me.
It
Oh,
can be.
Thank you so much for answering all the questions. And yeah, this was great. So talk to you later.
Yeah. Send me some of your work. I will definitely give you some feedback. Thank you.
Thank
For
you.
coming. Take care.
Bye. Bye, Mario.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Okay, and that's good to hear. In my experience as well, it was really easy to get the visa to study there. I didn't know if it was just because I was American, but sounds like they're a lot less strict about that, unfortunately. But it's something that it was pretty easy for Manuel as well. And I know we had there's another guy in my year. He was also Colombian.
Oh,
Yeah, so we have a lot of people specifically from South America coming in and attending the school.
Latinos be like. Oh, yeah.
No, it's honestly it's really nice because it is like the student population there. At least when I went, it was about half and half, like Canadians and immigrants.
That's so good.
Yeah, it was fun. Oh, okay. I just want
I
to
don't
show
know,
you.
I don't
Sorry.
know if you want to keep recording it, like the class, or you want like to cut it for your demo or your course. You know?
I'll head out in just a bit. I kind of am gonna cut myself off at the 8 p.m. mark.
You can always cut it in the in a in Apple Play.
Or what was that?
What? No, how do you say it? Premiere.
Or the presentation?
Yep.
Oh, yes. I can't stop the recording. I was just gonna quick show you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they don't let me not in charge of that. I just wanted to real quick show you a little bit about the color palette thing you were talking about, where it's one of the coolest things about color is you can really make any subject matter fit into any color palette you want once you know what to do with it. So these are some paintings by James Reynolds. He's another really nice American painter. And I noticed that he does a lot of these nighttime scenes that they're just really nice examples of how you can totally change the color of everything in the image and it still reads within the palette where, clearly this is a brown horse, but he's not painting it brown. If I were to,
It's like bluish.
yeah, it's just like a really dark blue, but
Yeah.
because everything around it is bluer, it still appears brown.
Oh.
Or same as this horse. This horse reads as like, it almost reads like it's a yellowy white horse. Like you would imagine, it's kind of a creamy white horse. But if I were to use like a color dropper on this, it's actually like a greenish blue. And everything around it is just greener and bluer.
Oh, yeah, like play with the value and the like your value is like green. The more greenier, the
It's yeah, it's hard to say. It's a part of color theory is that things only appear to be whatever color based on what is next to them. So just one more quick example before we go. I'll look it up on this tab. James Gurney is a great artist to look at for some color theory ideas. Okay, yeah, so here's a great example. In this one, he's painting the same scene just with different colors. Oh no. Like in this side, you can see down here, all he's using, he has 0 yellow in the palette. So this is the colors that he's able to use on the color wheel. He has green, he has red, he has blue. But you can see that in the shoes, it actually does look yellow.
Yeah.
And it's not because he actually added in any yellow. It's more likely it's this shade of green right here. But because in this palette that he limited himself to, that green is the closest you can get to yellow. So by using everything else on the other end, it kind of forces your eye to think it's those colors.
oh like she's like I'm like shooting the clock wheel hat and I only can use the bottom part of it.
Right.
Oh, it's a
Yeah, so
yellow.
those are the colors he's using for this bottom one here.
Oh, yeah, it could. Oh,
Isn't
that's
it weird?
interesting. Yes.
It's very much like an optical illusion. Like
Yeah,
this is
yeah,
another
yeah.
example. Where he's using pretty much the same palettes where there's
Oh,
no
that's nasty.
not stupid.
Yeah,
Same
but
shade.
it's green. It's green, and the red is green, and oh,
But yeah, so yeah, that's how you can make this. This is just a very basic shade of gray right here. It might even be like
Yeah.
a neutral gray, but when you surround it with all cool colors, it looks warmer. But when you surround it with all warm colors, it ends up looking a lot cooler.
For me to learn this, do you recommend like putting a filter on it? Like if I have my base colors and I put well, green filter on it, it will look like this, or
I think filters are a good way to play with adding in some color. As far as like being able to see how you can push color, where quite often when you first start out painting, you'll end up with the very basic colors that you imagine things to be. So if you're painting a background, say the trees will be brown, the leaves will be green, things like that. And then if you want to try and experiment with pushing the color, I recommend doing something like putting a filter over it for what you would like the scene to be more. Say you want it to be a nighttime scene. You put a blue, multiply filter over it. But once you've done that, instead of just continuing to paint in those basic colors like the brown of the tree, the green of the leaves, you use the color eyedropper to see what the color layer makes those colors into. And then you can just try painting a scene with those colors instead.
oh no.
And just kind of doing that over and over, you can develop an eye for it a bit better.
That's useful.
Yeah. Okay. Also, hello, Raven. I'm sorry. This is the very end of the class.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know that.
No,
Because
you're totally
it showed a
fine.
notification saying it's showing up. It came like at 6 p.m., which is my time, so I had no idea.
Oh no, that's weird. I know I'm also in a different time zone from the school, so
Oh crap.
I almost
I wish
missed
I'd
it.
known that. They didn't tell me about this. They said specific time.
I know it. I know I always have to convert it in my head because I went to that college, so I'm a little more used to it. But it's still annoying. I wish they would make that a little more clear that we're running on Toronto time.
Okay. Do you
Okay,
think
but
there'll
I
be
mean, there will
next
be
one?
the presentation has been recorded, so it'll be sent out to everybody that kind of RSVP'd to it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Of course. But yeah, I guess then I'll just be kind of wrapping up now. I got to do my little color lesson, so
Thank you so much. See ya.
no, I'm sorry. Sorry, the timing is off.
Yeah, sorry about that. I thought it was just begun, but I guess it's probably like a editing or error on the message that I got from the message saying, "Oh, it's starting. Please join." And I'm like, "Oh, okay."
Oh, like it just told you now?
Like a few minutes ago, it says, "Please join now," and I'm like, "Okay,
That's really weird, actually. I'm sorry. That's okay. That's more so on their part then.
okay, all right." Good
All
to
right.
see
Well,
you
yeah,
guys. Yeah.
recording will be out. I hope you have a good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you for sticking around, Mario. Yeah.
No problem.
Have a good one.
Yep.